So first we're going to talk about ways that we solve equations, okay? So that ways that we can solve quadratics. So how to solve quadratics. And we're just going to review the methods that we have learned in this section, in Module 4. So the first thing we learned how to do in Module 4 was we talked about how to solve by graphing. And when you're solving by graphing, all you're doing is you're looking for the x-intercepts. That's all you're doing. When you're solving by graphing, you're looking for the x-intercepts. And then the second way that we learned how to solve was we learned how to solve by factoring. And we touched on this briefly on 4.1 when we did that like last week sometime. I don't remember when it was. We touched on it briefly. We're going to come back and talk about factoring again on Wednesday. Okay, so we're going to talk about how to solve by factoring on Wednesday. So that way you guys can start to see a purpose in factoring. Because I told you all the purpose was coming. We're getting there. All right, the third way we learned how to factor was we learned how to factor by taking the square root helps if I can spell the word root. There's two O's in that. By taking the square root. And that is when we had stuff like x minus 7 squared equals 36. And we do this when we complete the square. We just can't do this to begin with. So we can solve by taking the square root. And then the fourth way that we learned how to factor was by completing the square. And the fifth way that we're going to learn how to factor is using the learn how to solve, is by using the quadratic formula. So we can always get a problem to complete the square. We can always put something in the quadratic formula. And they're both, the good thing about completing the square and the quadratic formula is that they're both going to give us both real and imaginary solutions. If I'm graphing, so when we say that we can solve by graphing, that means we look at where the graph crosses the x-axis. Well, if we have imaginary solutions, what does that mean about our graph? Yeah, it never crosses the x-axis, so you can't really solve that one by graphing because it's never going to touch. So the last two are going to work all the time. So we're going to learn about the quadratic formula today. So our problem is 7x squared plus 2x plus 3 equals -1. So the only thing you need to know about quadratic formula is that it has to equal 0. That's the big thing. So does this equal 0 at this moment? How do you get it to equal 0? You add 1 to both sides. So you get 7x squared plus 2x plus 4 equals 0. And this is the problem that we're going to work with. I'm going to rewrite the quadratic formula down here because y'all can't see it on my screen. I know that you can see it on yours, on your paper, but so you do not have to rewrite it. I'm just rewriting it so that I can have it on here. All right, so now I'm going to start plugging stuff in. Well, before I do that, let's identify A, B, and C. I think that's important. So A, how do you know which of those numbers is A? Sorry. So A in this problem was what number? 7, because it's always the number in front of x squared. B in this problem is the number in front of x, which is 2, and then C is... Okay, so now we're just going to plug stuff in. So it says -b. What is that -b? What do you think that means? It's going to change the sign. It's the opposite of b. So b is currently +2, so when I put it in here, it's going to be a -2. So -2 plus or minus the square root of b squared would be 2 squared minus 4 times a is, and then c is 4. All over 2 times 7. So when we go to solve these, the very first thing we do is we've got to take care of what's underneath the square root symbol. We've got to simplify that before we move on to anything else. So we have 2 squared minus 4 times 7 times 4. So you can, if you want to, plug all of this in the calculator. That's fine. Or you can do it like piece by piece. That's fine as well. So I have -2 plus or minus the square root of 2 squared minus 4 times 7 times 4. I think that's -108. Yes? Okay. So I end up with a -108 over, what's 2 times 7? 14. Okay. Can I take the square root of -108? No. I know that since it's negative, what does that mean is going to be part of my answer? An I. It's a non-real answer, so it's going to be an I. So if it's a non-real answer graphically, what does that mean about our graph? It's never going to touch the x-axis. It's just kind of floating off in space, somewhere above the x-axis in quadrants 1 and 2, or below the x-axis in quadrants 3 and 4. I cannot take the square root of -108, but I can simplify that. I know y'all love simplifying square roots so much. So much. What goes into 108? 9 times 12. What else? Can you do the tree? Okay, we can do the factor tree. I'm fine with that one. Okay, so if I'm going to do the factor tree, then I have, 108. That's, okay, we'll go back to 9 and 12 because we knew that's what it was. What's 9? 3 and 3. 12. 3 and 4. And then 4 factors into, okay. So really, I have -2 plus or minus the square root of, I'm going to write these in numerical order, and I'm looking at my end numbers wherever I stopped. So I have 2 times 2